Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today we continue our series, Post-War American Crime Film. The subject specifically is the 1953 little gem, The Hitchhiker, directed and also co-written by Ida Lupino. Now, this is a film with a very simple plot, but with a very rich and interesting visual style and some very powerful and memorable performances, all under the capable hands of Ms. Lupino. We'll be talking about that and other things after today's screening with our guest, Professor Foster Hirsch from Brooklyn College, and a noted expert on crime film and even more specifically on film noir. Now, enjoy your voyage in The Hitchhiker. Bienvenidos. Welcome back from what seems to be a nightmarish vacation in Mexico in this remarkably tight, well-crafted, and compelling little film, The Hitchhiker, directed by Ida Lupino. There's a lot to talk about in this small little film, and it's a great pleasure to have with us today here on City Cinematheque one of my colleagues from the City University system, Professor Foster Hirsch from Brooklyn College. Foster is the author of over 15 books on film history as well as theater history, one of your specialties. To many people who are fans of the American crime film, they've probably been in contact with the dark side of the screen film noir, which has been in print for 30 years, looking at this phenomenon, and it's certainly a book that's always been on my shelf, and I've assigned it. Foster.
You've assigned it.
Yes, sir. I've assigned that.
Assigned it. And the students reacted how?
No, they reacted well because the argument about the history and the components. Also, it's a very well illustrated book. So
yes,
they get to see what it's like. The concepts are very well illustrated, and there's a number of ways in which this film relates to what you're talking about in film noir. But before we sort of open that topic, let's begin. I think everybody has to begin with this film. This is an Ida Lupino film. So how does Ida Lupino move from being, an actress in crime film like High Sierra, as well as many other distinguished films, into being a woman only in her 30s who's directing films and a film like this? What do you make of?
Well, first of all, her achievement is extraordinary.
Right.
No other woman at that time did what she did. Formed her own independent company with her then husband, Collier Young, filmmakers, and did a series of films, all B films, all very modestly budgeted, on social issue topics: pregnancy, rape, unwanted pregnancy, rape, crime in the highways in this film.
Absolutely.
So she chose interesting, unusual subjects, bigamy, and in her famous film the same year, The Bigamist.
Right, absolutely. And of course you also have this whole notion that there's a special world which is the B film. That is a more modestly budgeted film that has its particular place in distribution because there needs to be a flow of product. And we should remind ourselves that today the flow of product is all in television and cable, because it's a very, very hungry monster that needs content all the time. But if we're looking back at almost 60 years ago, there's a hungry beast, and that's theatrical distribution.
Theatrical distribution, they needed second features, and we film historians know that some of those B films are more interesting than the A films. They could be subversive.
Absolutely.
They could be sort of termites, so they didn't have to follow the official policy. And some of the B films are terrific. Some of them are awful.
Right, absolutely.
Terrible. Don't want to say that all B films are wonderful. They're not. But Ida Lupino's little B films, and they're little films. Let's not overstate the case for them. They're small, modest films. But she had a terrific eye and a terrific sense of pacing, and no fat on them. So lean, so economical.
Right. And now you have to bring up the issue in a film like this. To what degree is this a woman's film or not, because here you have a woman director, but this is actually, you could say, a male action picture is one of the ways you can describe it.
It is absolutely. Her other films really were concerned with women's issues,
Right.
but not this film at all. I think it would be impossible to tell that it was directed by a woman.
Right.
It's a film about three men.
Right, right. And that brings up one of the things that I think people who get a little bit closer to film production itself know a great deal about, and that is that film is, it's an industrial art form, which requires a lot of equipment, and it requires, even in a modestly budgeted film, it's not the same investment as a canvas and your paints. So there's real money that needs to be made back, unless you're in one of the state systems. It doesn't expect that. So one of the key aspects is professionalism. That is, do you know how to behave as a director on a set? Do you know how to manage a crew? Do you know how to handle actors? And one of the, I have to use this word, one of the prejudices that Hollywood has always suffered and continues to some degree to suffer now is that women cannot meet the professional standards. Now, I'm saying it's a prejudice. I'm not endorsing it, but that has to do with certain features like, can you deal with unions that are on a set? Will they respect you and do what you need to do? Because you're supposed to be the top of the food chain here. And in a film like in a film like this, they're shooting on location in Mexico. This is arduous work. I mean, the work to set up even one of these distance shots of a car traveling across the desert is somebody working with a first-rate DP, but you've got to say, okay, we need to get that camera equipment over there, up on the top of that thing, and then the AD has to do this and pull this across. And so,
But the answer to your question is, obviously, Ida Lupino was capable of doing that. The proof is in the product.
Absolutely
and
the case.
that film is so controlled. Clearly, there's a strong director making every choice in the film. She knew how to work with actors, being a superb actor herself.
Absolutely.
And Ida Lupino played tough characters. She was somebody to deal with, I'm sure.
Yeah,
she never played a soft character. She was hard as nails and professional. And if you look at her career, though she didn't get a chance to make any more feature films after this, except for an anomaly in 1966 called
Trouble with Angels.
Trouble with Angels.
Right.
Yes. She did TV directing.
Right.
And she continued to act.
And she was a pioneer as a TV director.
Absolutely.
I mean, again, the reliable professional you come to. We celebrate, as we should, people like Howard Hawks, who had this great flexibility as a professional from genre to genre. But if you look at Ida Lupino's work in television through those years, she shifts from genre to genre, from series to series, and it's a lot of the kinds of things that people who were watching television 40 and 50 years ago say, oh, well, I remember that was a good. Well, because there was a good director behind it.
There was an excellent director, but I do think that the prejudice that you talked about had an impact on her career.
Yeah.
After a film like The Hitchhiker, which is so proficient, why weren't there more opportunities? That was sort of the end of the road for her as a director of theatrical films.
And she had a quip later in life about this. It's a wonderful thing quoted by one of her biographers. She once said, well, at Warner's, I rose to being the poor man's Betty Davis. And as a director in the 50s, I rose to be the poor man's Don Siegel.
Well, there's some truth to that.
And
I think
true.
part of the reason she went into directing is that she saw, being very intelligent, that her acting days, despite all her talent, were probably limited. And they were. She never appeared importantly, after about 1956 in movies. She had
Absolutely.
parts in the 70s, but supporting roles.
Supporting roles, and always, with the, I do remember. I want to mention it for people that she has a very small but incredibly memorable role in Sam Peckinpah's, I think, a bit neglected film Junior Bonner.
She's terrific in it.
She plays Steve McQueen's mother, and she manages with again, coming back to this film, with an economy of means as an actress, she implies all kinds of backstories in family
Absolutely.
relationship, and you can see that kind of storytelling intelligence as an actress is also something that you see here in this film.
But you could say in both areas of directing and acting, she never during her lifetime got her full due.
I think that's and whatever modest little pebble in the road this can be to pave her to get that. I'm happy we're able to do it. So let's talk about some of the what we'll call the narrative and artistic virtues of this film. What makes you admire this film? Sort of breaking it into some of the components.
Well, narrative.
Yeah, sure.
I constantly have arguments with people, as I'm sure you do. What is film noir?
Okay.
And it seems like the subject is of endless fascination because everybody has a different interpretation. No two historians seem to agree.
Right.
See, I don't think film noir, when it deals with the syndicate or the mob, that's not film noir to me. That's really the crime film or the gangster film updated. For me, the heart of film noir is innocent, middle-class people suddenly thrown into a crime scenario.
Okay.
Crime invades their lives, overtakes their lives. Suddenly, they're law-abiding people just like you and me. That, to me, is the heart of film noir. It's the film noir that interests me.
Yeah.
So this film absolutely satisfies that essential criterion. Two guys, friends, going on a fishing expedition.
Right.
A murderous hitchhiker gets into the back of their car. Their lives are transformed in a minute. The world of the normal is ripped asunder just like that. That's film noir to me.
Yeah.
Take a wrong turn in the street, Scarlet Street, you go home a different way, and you run into Joan Bennett and Dan Duryea. You're in trouble. That's film noir.
I'm in full agreement with you about that. And what's interesting about this film is that some film noirs, that plot of being drawn into this nightmare world that takes you out of your known universe, the plot is itself a kind of labyrinth, and there's frequently visual, parallels to that in it. They're literally lost in a world, and sometimes there's some famous film noirs which is very difficult to follow the plot because it's so intricate in certain ways. That's not this film.
This is so simple, so economical, so reduced that there's a certain artistry about the sheer simplicity of this film in terms of the storytelling.
Absolutely.
And we know very little about the three male characters. There's very little backstory, but if you listen closely, there's enough to intrigue you. We get in just a few lines of dialogue, we get the sense of who these three characters are, and they're each quite different from the other.
Right. So the simplicity of plot here actually, and we don't have that much backstory, means that this becomes this kind of, obviously, chamber piece. It's a chamber piece nightmare, sort of reminiscent of some of the kinds of expressionist dramas, from the turn of the century, in which it's not. The characters, I would say, in this film are almost strange. Maybe it sounds strange to say this, but lyrical. It's the power of each personality as opposed to the details of backstory.
There are no details, basically.
Yeah.
Almost none. You have to listen carefully to get any clue about where these characters come from psychologically. But there's some.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's some.
Right.
And they're intriguing.
And then who they are, there's this, one of the conventions here is if you enter this nightmare world, those conventions of society that have really, given you your life, kept you under control, protected you, etc., are being successively stripped away. And so the essence of who that person is successively revealed by the severity of the experience, and that
applies absolutely here. We know that the men are married,
right,
that they were war buddies, and that they're going on an excursion that takes them away from their comfortable, secure, middle-class lives, and they're in the desert, and they're heading toward Mexico. Always trouble in film noir. always a dangerous place. But they're stripped to the essence, and we see
right
in the moment of their being challenged that they act in a certain way. And what I love about the film is they don't act heroically. They don't have grand schemes of revenge. They don't act in this impossible superhero style that you'd get, God forbid, if the film were remade today. They act just the way average people from their background would act.
Right. And I want to continue just with the treatment of Mexico line of this, because I think you brought up this very interesting point that there are two Mexicos in this film. One of the Mexicos is this nightmare dreamscape, which is represented by at certain images by the corrupt city that we see.
All too briefly.
I
That
know.
city is fascinating, and there's some great noir photography of neon lights going on and off. But do you notice the Frank Lovejoy character pretends to be sleeping?
Absolutely
When they're
correct.
tempted to go into one of these places, he pretends to be sleeping as if he doesn't want to violate his marital vows. He's afraid.
Absolutely.
Or whatever, there's something holding him back.
Absolutely.
And they don't go into the bar where they were going to visit one of the women they knew before.
Absolutely. No. And it is defined as the ultimately kind of corrupt border town. And then then
But they get out of it.
Well, they get
very
out of
quickly.
it, and then they're in the nightmare scape after the Hitchhiker of the desert, which becomes this psychological correlative to all of the stress of being kidnapped. So that's one Mexico. There's a nightmare Mexico of the city and of the desert. But then what's very interesting in the film is that almost the dead center of the film, we have this good Mexico introduced, which is the non-corrupt, institutionally modern, responsible Mexico that is going to come to their rescue.
And that works with the American officials.
Absolutely correct.
There's no tension between them at all. And that good Mexico is a rarity in film noir.
Yeah.
Every time film noir gets to Mexico, it's, I would say, almost 99 times out of 100 corrupt. The great foul place.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not in this film.
No, that's what I find very interesting.
Very unusual.
That it can have this double function, but it's also in terms of the plotting, it's interesting because as things get more and more extreme, as we see the physical breakdown of the characters, the physical stresses, then we keep coming back to this. To this Mexico in which institutions are functioning, the police are doing their right job.
Very orderly, very procedural, and we
Absolutely.
have confidence that they're going to solve the crime.
Right, exactly. Now, just one other interesting aspect about that is this treatment of language in the in the film, because for the hitchhiker, for Emmett, he is scared of the possibilities of communication, and we have the one American who is modestly
Modestly bilingual.
Modestly bilingual, yeah. Absolutely the case. But that is set in the contrast of the Mexican official who can do everything as a perfect bilingual, with the American official. So he's the modern Mexican who can deal in this cosmopolitan way with his neighbor to the north.
As we're talking, it seems to me that one of Ida Lupino's accomplishments in the film is to break a kind of racial stereotyping, which was endemic to film noir.
Well, I think it's a very good. I think that's an excellent point.
I mean, it's not what the film's about,
Right.
But it is there.
Right, absolutely the case.
And it's sort of smart, isn't it? Sort of an intelligent point.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, this sort of takes us over onto the visuals of it, because that normal institutional Mexico is handled in, I would call, a kind of very nice but flat style. Whereas we have the world that they're in, which is there's location shooting here, but it's not flashy, but it gets more and more severe. And we have a daytime world out in the desert in which you can almost think, this place is feeling like very Beckettian, It's like these people trapped in this Beckett-like wasteland.
Sometimes I thought of Greed.
Very good, absolutely.
The parched landscape, and it seems to get hotter and more parched as they go further into their journey.
Absolutely the case.
And so it's very much a Mexico of physical absence almost.
Right. Well, talk to us a little bit about, because this is something I know you've thought about for a while, as a matter of fact. These two sort of, I'll call them tendencies of film noir. One is the studio-bound expressionist tendency, and another one is a documentary location tendency. How does that sort itself out, both in the development of film noir, and how do you think it relates to this particular film?
Well, this film is a sort of reflective of a turning point in the look of noir. When I was doing my book research 30 years ago, I was enamored of the studio-bound expressionistic noir because it's so clearly on the surface artistic.
And what are some of your favorites of that? Just two or three titles.
Well, one of them is Out of the Past, directed by Nicholas Musakara, who is our
director of photography.
Director of photography
Right.
on this film. Almost any of them.
Yeah.
Double Indemnity, Scarlet Street, Woman in the Window, all the great iconic 40s film noir were studio bound.
Right.
And they were, and being in the studio, they interpreted the world and they created a world.
Right.
And it wasn't quite our world. It was parallel to, it was a dreamscape.
Yeah.
But this is not in a dream world. This is in real Mexican
Absolutely.
locations, desert locations. I thought some of them looked very familiar to desert locations in California. I don't know that they were shooting in Mexico.
Well, no, RKO was doing a lot of shooting in Mexico because they actually had corporate
Really?
Yeah, well, the quick version of that is, once again, blame it on Adolf Hitler, because Argentina refused to officially sign on with the Allies. We boycotted Argentine. We wouldn't sell any film equipment to Argentina during World War II. We therefore promoted the Mexican film industry as a direct policy, and the studios got deeply involved, even supervising the construction of some of the studios in Mexico that then created the golden era of Mexican cinema, and RKO was one of the studios most deeply involved in that. So it's not a surprise that a number of films with RKO would have these settings, because they had ties that had come out of World War II policies and then spilled over for about the next 10 years or so.
Okay, so it's the real Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
It's the real Mexico. But some of that is treated expressionistically,
Correct.
like the cityscape of Mexicali.
Absolutely.
And some of the night scenes, beautiful chiaroscuro lighting in those scenes. But then the daytime scenes, the institutional scenes are very flatly filmed with the authorities plotting to get the criminal. But the scenes of the car moving through the vast desert landscape is done in an almost semi-documentary style. So that introduces a new visual motif into film noir. And when I was doing the book 30 years ago, I liked the artistic, high expressionist mode, and now that I'm entering senior years, I like the location shooting. Right. And I think that the location shooting actually has more of a sense of the potential for menace, because that's a world that we know.
Right,
I've driven in roads that look just like that. And if this can happen to those characters, it can happen to me. In other words, if noir invades a daytime location setting, it's almost more terrifying than if it takes place in this alternate dreamscape that we're used to from the high 40s.
Absolutely.
Follow what I'm saying about
No,
that?
I follow it very well. And let me just give you one narrative detail. For example, that moment in which they come and there's the abandoned mine shaft. And we have just the narrative detail of dropping the stone to see how deep it is, and the threat of that you're in a place where you may never be found and you can simply be shot and thrown into this.
But it's a real place.
Absolutely correct.
It is not studio. It's not protected by the studio environment. You're out in the open, and you're more vulnerable because of it.
Oh, absolutely.
And so crime becomes almost more terrifying and more menacing in the daytime in the real world.
Yeah.
And that's what happens in noir in the 50s. And I think noir is fascinating in the 50s. The 40s gets all the credit, and I don't want to take that away from I mean, those are great films. But I think 50s noir needs to be looked at more closely.
Well, and it's this, you could call it this eruption of the nightmare that had been contained in the night in the city into the daylight, and that, you know, to take a film that's not a film noir, but is related to many of the anxieties of film noir, something like Don Siegel's classic The Invasion of the Body Snatchers,
Absolutely.
in which the beauty of the Californian suburb is the site of a central, you know, nightmare in which people are being robbed of their very humanity.
A normal world, one that we could all recognize, and look what happens to it. If it could happen there, it could happen here, and here, and to you and to me.
Yeah,
and that gives film noir kind of immediacy and a psychological reality that I like, because I want to identify with these characters. Desperate Hours.
Absolutely, yeah.
Normal people in their own home, invaded by criminals, their world turned upside down, ripped asunder in a second.
Okay.
That's film noir to me.
We're going to have to end this time around on that film noir for you. If you'd like to know more about City University Television, about City Cinematheque, or about this particular series, there's an easy way to find out, and it's not a surprise. Visit our website. Please visit www.cuny.tv. You'll find there a menu of all of our programming. If you'd like to be on the E-list for City Cinematheque, you'll find a click on to communicate with us by email, and we also always welcome your comments. So, for more information, please visit www.cuny.tv. Foster, a very fast 30 minutes, chock full of commentary and insight on your part. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks, Jerry.
Great. And I want to thank you, as always, for joining us here on City Cinematheque as we stroll through the archives of film history. Please join us in coming weeks as well for other series and other films. But bye-bye for now.